Father, I'll begin by asking you to give us your name. And just tell us your full name, Father.
I am Jim Reuter of the Society of Jesus.
Arthur Francis
Bill Kreutz. Edmundo Martinez.
Francis X. Clark,
John Krebs,
Luigi Moigi,
Andrew Bauer,
Miguel Anselmo Bernat. My name is Honesto. My middle name is Chavez. And last name Pagana.
I'm Roque Angel Ferrios Iglesias.
Okay, Father, we'll begin with and some personal background that you may want to share with us.
My name is Charles Wolf, W-O-L-F. I was born in 1920, in February the 10th, 1920. I entered the Jesuit Novitiate at Wernersville right after high school in 1937. I was 17 when I entered. And then I've had 4 years at Wernersville, 2 years of novitiate and 2 years of juniorate, and then I came over here to the Philippines. I wanted very much to come on a foreign mission, and so, the mission at that time of our province was the Philippines. So I came over here in 41. I came in August 1941, and the war came here in December. So I had only 3 or 4 months here. Most of those 3 or 4 months were spent out at Novaliches. I was studying philosophy. And when the war came, we moved to Manila, and I was under detention in Manila for 3 years. And after that 1 year of detention down in Los Baños, so our activity was considerably restricted under this detention. So I didn't get to know. I just got to know a very narrow spectrum of the Philippines, because we were always under detention. Our movements were restricted. We could go out, but not very much. And I was out in those 3 years during philosophy. I don't think I was out of Manila or far out of Manila once. And it was sort of a it wasn't terribly painful, but it was just a detention. It was light security, put it that way. But we certainly were confined in our. So this was a rather strange introduction to the Philippines, which wasn't any introduction at all. Like, I didn't get to see much of the country. I didn't see much of the people. There we were there. Life there during philosophy in the old Ateneo, it was just a routine. There weren't many changes you could introduce. We were, of course, the schools weren't running. We had no income. We were depending on the people for our livelihood. There's no aid coming from the states at all. During those 3 or 4 years, I must have perhaps got 2 or 3 letters from my family. I think they got perhaps 1 or 2 from me. We were sending more letters, but they just weren't reaching where they were
How did you feel about that, Father? That the fact that you arrived here in the Philippines, stayed here for 4 months, and then for 4 years, 4 years, you were under detention. What were some of your thoughts while you were going through that?
Well, we were living pretty much in uncertainty. You might say there wasn't much pain or suffering to it, but we knew that we were in a city that was occupied by an army. We knew that army could explode at any time and turn on us, so we were living in quite a bit of uncertainty. I myself, personally, we had some tremendous support from each other. The Jesuits did. We were a group of, let's say, us scholastics. How many were we? Perhaps 40 or 50 Filipinos and Americans. We had a tremendously close spirit there. The spirit was very good. We didn't give up. We at the beginning we said, "Oh, this will be over in a couple of months," and then all of a sudden, when Corregidor fell, this is going to be a couple of years. All right. We sort of moped around for maybe half an hour or so, but the spirit was tremendous of the society in during those times. And we supported each other. Fathers supporting scholastics, scholastics supporting each other, things like that. It was that's one of the very strong memories that I have. I never felt out in the cold. We were living a little bit on the edge because we knew that anything could happen. But I was never frantic or, was never, I just took it day by day.
Do you have any memory of any particular Jesuit during those years while you were in detention who stood out or who did something that touched you or inspired you? You may want to mention his name.
Most certainly Father Hurley. I thought he was a magnificent superior. Father Hurley. He kept us together. He was a real leader. Father Hurley was. Man of very good judgment. He was fine. Another man that I recall very vividly is Father Arthur McCaffrey. He was our spiritual director during the war. He's my spiritual director, and for most of us also. And he went blind during the war. And I just admired the courage of that man. For instance, when we went to concentration camp, he was with us. He couldn't see anything, we ourselves were pretty much in the dark, but he was blind. But the tremendous courage that he had always impressed me. He was he impressed all of us as a very holy man. He stands out very much in my he and Father Hurley. Another person that I grew very close to is someone whom many of the Jesuits will recognize as Manny Ramos. Manny Ramos and myself, we were classmates. There were in our year in theology there were 5: Berkey Cupin and Manny Ramos, and Ruane and Riley and myself. What was I going to say? What was I talking
Manny
about?
Ramos.
Yeah. When we were separated from the Filipinos, we went to concentration camp and they stayed in Manila or around Manila. He got sick with his mind gave up on him, and so he was never able to be ordained. But I remember Manny very much. A good companion and a very brilliant person, and as far as studies went. the story of our, let's see, I finished philosophy in Manila, the old Ateneo, and then when I should have gone to Regency, the Japanese put us in concentration camp down at Los Baños, and you've certainly heard a lot about that. I won't go into much of that. I didn't think there was, except for the last couple of months, there wasn't a great deal of hardship or sadism or cruelty from the Japanese. They didn't want to feed us towards the end. That was quite a hardship. But in the beginning, well, for me anyway, it got me out of Manila, and I could see some of the countryside. I could see a mountain, or I could see some fields or something like that. That made a great deal of difference to me. But once again, we were living a barracks life, which meant it was very close living. And once again, there was tremendous support from each other of the Jesuits, the fathers, and you got to live real closely with the fathers, and you began to realize these are good men. These are real good men. That's the impression I had. And at that time, usually in the society, there's sort of quite a distance separating fathers and scholastics, so you didn't know what the fathers were doing except perhaps preparing classes or something like that. But in camp, we were just real close together, and the spirit impressed me tremendously. It carried me. I never felt out in the cold. I never panicked, and that is due mostly to the support we were giving each other.
But how were you finally set free from the detention camp?
Well, the American Army, I guess it was the Marines, the paratroopers came in. We were near the Lake Laguna, and the American intelligence was very much afraid that the Japanese would turn on our camp and kill all the, because the Japanese were losing at that time, they would kill all the prisoners there. So they figured they had to free us, and paratroopers came in, and there were guerrillas, American guerrillas outside the camp itself, the perimeter itself, and at 7 in the morning, when the Japanese were going through all of much of their calisthenics and exercises and their own roll call, they were all gathered together there. The American planes came over and just massacred them. They just bombed them. A couple hundred Japanese in the garrison, they were killed. We didn't know what was going on. And then the Americans came into, and the guerrillas came into our part of the camp. They told us, get in the Amtraks, don't take anything, get in there right away. We got to get in here and get out again. So within an hour or so, we just piled into the Amtraks. There were 2,000 prisoners. We went down the lake. As we went down the Lake Laguna from Los Baños to Santa Rosa, to Laguna to Santa Rosa. What was I saying?
You were the.
Oh yeah, we were under fire. The Japanese from the shore and from the mountains around, they were strafing us all the way there. I guess that was the time when we were most in most danger at that time. And during the actual taking of the camp itself, that was a very tricky thing to get us out of there. And we went to Muntinlupa. Muntinlupa, there's a lot going on there today at Muntinlupa too. It's Leo is going to be electrocuted. But we went there. All the prisoners I don't know what happened to the prisoners, but we simply went in there and we were using their facilities. All that you had was a bare plank to sleep on. Incidentally, we couldn't bring any of our belongings out of camp. Just the clothing was on your back, and they had to give us all army clothing. Would you ask me?
No, I'm just asking you to tell the story, Father.
Yeah, but
so you got to Muntinlupa.
Yeah, and then we had to wait there for a couple of months until they could get boats, ships to take us to the States. They were bringing troops over here for the attack on Japan. And finally, after, I guess we were there about 6 or 8 weeks in Muntinlupa, they managed to get a ship that took us back home. During that time, we were recovering from what you would say is a starvation diet. We weren't bed patients. We could walk around, but we were pretty weak. And then when we gained the strength, that the place where we were was a field hospital where soldiers American soldiers who were injured were brought there. That was the first, so they were bringing the injured soldiers into that was a medical base and we were helping out there with the meals and various ways that we could.
Oh, do you remember the first day that you arrived in Manila? 1941?
Yeah, I remember very.
Can you describe what happened?
Well, we came over on a ship, and it took a month to get here. And we didn't get off. I guess, I don't know what the trouble was, maybe. But anyway, when we did get off and get into Manila, it was pretty dark. We went to the Superior's house in Intramuros and met Father Hurley. And then they took us right away out to Novaliches. And my first night was spent in Novaliches, and in that big room there, between the retreat thing and the retreat quarters and the novitiate. And I spent. There was a big dormitory with about 40 beds in it, all lined up, and someone had to show me how to use a mosquito net and things like that. But that was my first night here, and we get up in the morning and I'm not sure. I think we went to class that day, or not that day. We did. Maybe we had that day off, and the next day we went to class.
And Father, after the war, you went back to the States for your continued formation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then when did you come back to the Philippines?
52. I finished Regency in Theology and Tertianship and came back in 52, and my first assignment was Naga. I went down to Naga to teach English and religion in the high school.
How long were you there, Father?
I got down there in September, August, September, about 6 or 8 months, I guess, yeah.
Then after Naga, you were...
Then I went to Novaliches, Associate Master of Novices for 3 or 4 years there. Denny Lynch was master first. I was associate with him, and then Jim McCann came, and I was 3 years with Jim McCann. And then I went down to Zamboanga. From there for about a year. I was teaching as minister down there. And I came back and then I was appointed rector of Novaliches. And incidentally, when I was socius there, many of the men who knew us was there. Fernandez was there. Many of the priests that you know, they were novices when I was socius and rector there. I was rector there for 6 years. And then after rector for 6 years, I had a few months as spiritual director, and And Mike Casals was appointed to be the Mike Casals was appointed to be Master of Novices, and he asked if I could be his socius. And I was very happy to say yes.
Father, now your work is mostly in spiritual direction.
Yes,
direction.
Yeah.
Among all your ministries, among all the ministries you've been involved in, which one do you like best?
I guess the thing I like individual directed retreats of all the works that I've done. I enjoy one-on-one direction, but retreat work, and if you'd say what kind of retreats, individually directed retreats, 30 days or 8 days or whatever you want.
Why do you like this kind of work, Father?
Well, that goes back to very early when I entered. I didn't know any Jesuits before I entered, and when I did enter, one of the first things I was hearing about was the spiritual exercises. And I went in to ask one of the formation team there at Wernersville, Father John McAvoy, he was the socius there. I was asking him about what are these spiritual exercises that the novices are talking about. He said, well, you'll learn more about it, but then he began to explain what a retreat was. And in the course of our conversation, he says, every Jesuit, by the time he finishes his course, should know how to retreat. So I kept that in mind, and that was always something I had sort of in the margins of what I was doing. How could this, I wanted to give retreats after he said that. And I kept working on the exercises and all through the course. In theology, so much applies to the exercises, and I just kept. I read commentaries on it. I really so. But the inspiration came from what he said. Every Jesuit is expected to know how to give retreats at the end of the course. I have mentioned one already, namely the whole war experience, that the spirit of that group, Americans and Filipinos, during those 3 and 4 years, such a high. There's a spirit of unity, and the times were tough, but there wasn't a lot of moping around. That's certainly the spirit of the society that meant a lot to me. I guess something else that stands out is just the gradual turnover of the Jesuits in the Philippines. From I was here when we were still more or less what we would call a mission, then a vice province. Just to see that gradual turnover over the years, where things were put in the hands of the Filipinos. That's what we came for. That impressed me.
Why did that impress you, Father?
Well, you could sense things moving. You sense some progress. You'd say that's why we came here, to turn. We didn't come here for ourselves, to turn the province over to the Philippines, and the Philippines, it grew into that, and I felt it good. That's precisely why we came.
But some people felt that they were rather painful or bloody years. No? Some Americans were kind of hurt. There were some hurt feelings.
Well, in that area just around before, well, martial law was just before that. There was a tremendous amount of agitation and nationalism. There was a lot of pain there.
Did you feel some of these pain?
I was in retreat work, full-time retreat during well, wait a minute. Back when I was at Novaliches, yes, it was It was I was rector during during the Master novices during the turbulent years, let's say 65 to 70. There's a lot of agitation then. It could be painful. There wasn't too much. It was very personal. It's just you began to realize that this was not going to be a really easy transition. But what I do appreciate very much, I had some, being master of novices, I had some decisions to make with regard to the novices, whether did I figure that they were ready for vows or not. And I made the decisions. Father Della Costa was the provincial at the time. He always backed me up on that. He said, well, you're there, you're on the job, what do you say? I'll back you up, and he did. I appreciated that very much. But there was a lot of pain around, around 69 and 70. I left Novaliches then after 15 years. And what was I saying?
Some pain during the transition, Father?
Yeah, but I was then on, shall I say, on the road outside giving retreats. I was living downtown in our house on Taft Avenue, which we don't have anymore, like Ignatian Taft Avenue. You'd hear a lot of things that were going on that were painful. Actually, in the community where I was superior there for several years, we were getting along pretty peacefully there. It was, the Ateneo was on fire at that time.
Yeah. Would you have any experience or experiences which you would consider particularly sad or painful personally as a Jesuit here working in the Philippines?
Particularly sad or painful? I'd have to think that over. But right now, nothing comes to mind. Nothing comes to mind. If I'll let you know if something does. Mm-hmm.
Father, what do you think? How many years have you been in the Philippines?
Well, I guess what? For 50, I guess. Let's say 50 years,
50
maybe
years.
A little more.
You've been here a long time, so
Yeah.
In fact, you're more Filipino than most of us in that sense. But
Yeah.
how would you, if you were to assess the work of the society in the Philippines, what do you think would be, what would you consider a unique contribution of the Jesuits in the Philippines, both in the past and maybe for the future?
A contribution.
Yeah. What do you think should we?
From the past, I always figured, as far as the Ateneo went, that the lights were on, that you could ask questions, and there was no limit to the questions you could ask. I thought it was a tremendous thing, because I was running into other, groups and things. They were afraid to ask the questions, but I always figured at now they're honest enough to. That always impressed me very, very much. You're asking about one thing. One of my regrets is I didn't take the opportunity, or the opportunity wasn't given to me to learn Filipino. That's you might say that's I always sort of sometimes I get angry, sometimes sad about it. It's all right, but I think we were a little bit narrow-minded way back there when they, for instance, during the war would have been a perfect time to really, because we were living with Filipinos and just to learn the language. But, politics was involved in that also. The whole war situation was, the Japanese were pushing Filipino. And those in the Japanese, they weren't pushing it, so there's a lot of emotional stuff involved. But that is one of my regrets. You know, I can live with it and everything, and people are wonderful the way they accept it, but that is one lack.
What would you say is one of the best things that happened to you here as a Jesuit? Looking on the other side, the more positive side.
I think one of the best things that happened to me was when I came over here in '41. I felt very insecure, both in studies and just wondering, could I be a Jesuit? Basically, that was it. Could I be a Jesuit? I wanted to be, there's no doubt in my mind, but I was just wondering whether I could make it or not, basically. And the whole war experience, when I came out of that, looking back on it, there's no doubt in my mind whether I could make it or not. I came out of that confirmed in my own mind as a Jesuit. That was the best thing that happened to me. I've never had any doubts since then. And that was not a project I had set for myself all of a sudden, and I didn't realize it until fairly recently that it was a very critical time for me, and I appreciate especially the direction of Father. I mentioned Father McCaffrey, his direction, and just the spirit. I realized I'm one of this group. Then I was set for the rest. That's the best thing that happened to me. Mm-hmm.
Father, final question. What's this thing about birds? How did you get started with bird watching? I mean, all the scholastics know that you spend a lot of time, you have a lot of interest in birds. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we lived in the country at home, up in the mountains. There were fields around us, mountains, woods, and flowers and trees, and of course that attracts the birds. And a couple of my uncles, especially, one uncle was very interested in birds. He had bird books and he had binoculars, and he got me interested. And I can remember he said to me one morning, and one evening he said to me, "Charlie, let's go out and see if we can find that yellow-breasted chat tomorrow morning." So we get up early, and we had binoculars in the book, and we went out in the fields, and right away we found that yellow-breasted chat. It was there. That turned me on. And then I got interested in the birds around home, and could name them, and read about them, and so forth. But it was just that experience with my uncle that's what. Ever since then, I have been interested, and my bird experiences over here have been a tremendous help to me. It's relaxation, it's recreation, it's extremely interesting, extremely gratifying. I know all the common birds around here, around the Ateneo. I know all the common birds of the Philippines, and I always find it fascinating to go out and see something of the birds. Yeah, their colors, their songs, their comings and goings. There's always something new with the birds with me.
How would you compare the birds here with the birds back home?
Well, there's an entirely different, because this is the tropics, and at home it's, the central zone. There's an entirely different type of bird over here. Both have their, their beautiful singers, their ones with beautiful colors. I am concerned about the birds on the campus, about, I'd like to see much more awareness of, for instance, what building does, or what burning a field does, or what cutting down trees. It's always affecting the birds, the environment. Basically, that's what they're an important part of the environment, and I'm not sure that they're given the right priority. We're not a navy over here. We're not a zoo, but we have the birds and things that there are various movements that could be made to make sure that they stay. But there's not that much interest in the environment.
Last question, Father. If a lot of the younger judges look up to you as a spiritual father, what can you share with them as far as some words of, maybe some advice about being a Jesuit, what it means?
Well, I go back to the core of the spiritual exercises, and Jesus is at the center. He's the anchor. To know Him and to love Him and to follow Him, that's what our life is all about. The spiritual exercises can help to absorb a lot of that. It gives you a way of showing you how to absorb gospel values. I think that's the spiritual exercises are a way of assimilating the gospel to yourself. It's a tremendous gift that Ignatius has given to the church. The spiritual exercises are what they're doing is helping us to assimilate gospel values, to know Him, to love Him, and to follow Him. And as one parting remark, stay with Mark's gospel.
Thank you very much, Father. Thank you. Hope we didn't tire you out too much, Father.